Thank you all so much for coming out this evening to celebrate Jess's wonderful work and this exhibition that we've been able to put on together. Jenny queued up really nicely for a place that I'd like to start, which is just to acknowledge for all of you how much I have truly appreciated working with Jess. This began, as Jay said, with a purchase in 2022 and an additional purchase in 2024 for a night prize, which occasioned the exhibition, what we can all enjoy now. I was reflected on the fact that we emailed back and forth and on many occasions said, let me know if you need to have a call about this. And we didn't get on a Zoom call or a phone call until 2 weeks ago. And I think this was over in our correspondence because it was that easy to communicate. And in an art world where artists are absolutely entitled to be difficult at research, that's not something that we choose to be. So I wanted to ask, from your point of view, how do you conceptualize or approach working with museums as a work of friend?
Yeah, thank you. And can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm just setting the thingy here so it doesn't make that awful sound again. Before I answer, I just want to say a big thank you to Jeff and everyone here at the museum. I know it's many, many, many hands to make an installation possible. So thank you to everyone on the team who worked on this show. I'm really honored to be here and really honored to be in the collection. So thank you for years of support, and thank you all for coming out tonight when it's maybe snowing. So yeah, to answer that, I don't know, if it's too weird, we'll switch to the other one. I'll just try to not move at all. So yeah, I have always worked in museums, and it's for a couple of reasons. But when I finished my BFA in photography, the Mass College of Art, I got a job at the Harvard Art Museum. I first worked at the print study room, and then I worked photographing the collection. But I was immediately in this amazing museum environment, and I would come in really early in the morning and be alone in that space. I photographed 25,000 works of art alone in art storage. It was kind of an amazing post-BFA experience. But that is all to say, very early in my career, I really fell in love with the museum space and really came to understand it as a place where these transformative and in some cases really life-affirming experiences can happen. So I was interested in museums from the beginning, and then also because of the work that I make, being photographic portraiture, it finds a home with the museum space. It's not really a casual collector purchase most of the time. So it was also, I deeply believe in the museum as a space where amazing things can happen, but it also was a really good fit for the work that I was making.
Yeah. I think you already mentioned a little bit about your education, and maybe I'd like to walk through some of that.
Sure.
In particular, because there's a great serendipity that happened at the exhibition upstairs, which I'll admit was not something that we specifically planned. But we have 3,500 graffiti photographs in our collection. 3 of them are by Dow Bay, whom Jess is specifically connected to, and one of those 3 out of 3,500 happens to be the closest work of art in the gallery adjacent to where Jess's exhibition is, which is just really amazing. So when you go up to see Jess's show, right around the corner in our gallery, you can under survive this, also look at Dow Bay's work, and so you'd like to speak about your education and that relationship.
Sure, yeah. I mean, taking a step way back, I spent my childhood, I grew up in Parkitsville, and I did not come from a family that went to art museums, and it was not part of what I grew up with, but I knew from a really early age that I wanted a camera, I wanted to make pictures. So that came into my life really early, but then my formal education didn't really begin until the very end of high school and into college. I found refuge in the art department in my high school. I was out as queer, and it was, aside from me being very creative, it was also this very safe space in my high school, so I kind of moved into the art department. But then I got my BFA in photography at the Mass College of Art, and I had really amazing faculty there. A lot of people working in large format serial photography, which informed my practice. And then I spent several years working in museums. And then I moved to Chicago primarily to study with Dugan. I wanted to work with someone who was really a master of portraiture and also could speak to making work from within and about communities that have been marginalized, and sort of balancing your artistic voice with the responsibility of representation. So I moved to Chicago to work with Dawood, and I did my MFA there, and we remained very close. He was a very significant influence on me. Another important mentor was Kelly Connell, who I know has shown here, and in Cleveland recently. So yeah, so I had amazing people there. And also going back to the museums, when I was in grad school, I worked at the Museum of Contemporary Photography because I had made my living in the museum field. I thought that's what I was going to keep doing after grad school, but I also just really fell in love with looking at and teaching from original works of art. I'm really spoiled. I don't like going to regular museums because you have to see these in crowds behind glass, and you know, there's like something really amazing that happens when you can just be up close with an object. So yeah, I spent 3 years working at the museum there, and also working really closely with Dawood on the Visiting Artist series. You know, the videos are a relatively newer part of my work. I guess we're going on 9 years now, so not that new. But I've actually always thought of my practice and my work as my formal art photographs. You know, I was trained on a 4x5 view camera. It's this very slow, elaborate process to make the picture. And so I actually didn't think of my vernacular work as being part of my art practice. But I mean, one reason I started working the video is because I felt like there was a real limit to the narrative in that kind of fine art photograph. I mean, you could say a lot, but you couldn't get past a certain level. You couldn't get into a certain level of specifics. And I realized that by working in video, I could tell more of that story. And so I turned to my snapshots and my archival family photographs and started working with that for the first time. And then again with the letter to my daughter, you know, I realized in the pictures I make of my family, some of which you're seeing here, you know, they were very formal. I've always shied away from an overt narrative because I want my portraits to be more experiential and sort of transcend the specifics of the moment in a way, so you can be more engaged emotionally and psychologically. So I've always kind of avoided too much narrative. But then I realized when I was trying to tell the story of becoming a parent, you know, it's like I never made an art photograph of myself like pushing my daughter in a stroller or wearing her in a baby carriage. You know, it's like things that I didn't image. And so when I turned to video, I could bring in all these pieces that I had kind of left out of my capital A art practice. Yeah, so I still sort of think of them, I'm a fairly formal image maker, as I'm sure you can see, so I think of them as these very specific bodies of work. So turning to the vernacular was kind of unusual.
Yeah. Well, let's start and really get established in the formal side, and then as we go along, we'll work into the vernacular side.
Sure.
So, well, when I think of dérobé, there's two topics, like we could cover one, and we talk about this expression and the art mentioned, working with marginalized communities and word of photo representation. The other thing is really, I think, an ethical approach to portraiture, really a collaboration with subject. Can you talk about what a portrait session with you is like?
For sure. I mean, just to hit that home, I think for me, you know, all of my work as an artist first and foremost centers around consent and collaboration, and it's really important to me, both just as a, you know, fully complex person, but also as someone working within queer and trans communities. It's something that I've taken great care with. And so it really has to start there. And, you know, it's slightly different for different bodies of work. Obviously, my family is sort of one dynamic. Certain projects, like I made a project called To Survive on the Shore, which it was about transgender and gender expansive older adults that had a very specific focus and kind of way of working. But what I consider my like deep long-term soul work is what you see in the gallery. And for that, the people that I choose to photograph are people that I resonate with on a kind of chemistry level or energetic level, and some of them are really close friends. I do photograph some of the same people over many years, including Oscar and Elsid, who are upstairs. They're people that I work with over and over and over, and the trust really builds over that time as well. And then some people and some people I meet in passing and I just feel connected to. Actually, that's how I first met Elsid. They were working at a commie shop and I was just taken with them, and we built this relationship. So it all starts there with this very task to make the portrait and the person being willing. And, The way that I work is very slow. I work, just to answer the formal questions, I have a digital medium format camera and a tripod. I make all my work on a tripod, almost all of it. I use all natural light, so I have no lighting. I don't like to work with any assistants. I don't have any special gear, just a camera on a tripod. And that simplicity is really important to me because a lot of what I do when I'm making a portrait is actually about creating an environment in which a very real emotional exchange can take place between me and the person I'm photographing. And it's also very much about reading their energy and responding as an artist. So I have to kind of strip everything down so it's just me and that person. And then I'm very intentional about the color, obviously, you can see, and the light. The light is really the number one in all of the pictures. So if I'm outdoors, I schedule the shoots at a specific time of day. Mostly at sunset, occasionally at sunrise, though I think Shira is the only person who will maybe at sunrise. Most people prefer sunset. But I plan everything around the light, but then also the color, thinking about the emotion and the psychology of the color. And then from there, I spend anywhere between 1 and 2 hours making the portrait. And so it's a lot of, I'll speak to the person and just say, if we were sitting here on this bed, how would you sit? Or if we were talking, how would you rest your hands or tilt your head? Or, so I'm trying to figure out how their body specifically feels comfortable and at ease. And then it's really this back and forth of me directing them. But I always say that I'm trying to direct them into the most visually compelling version of themselves. Like, I'm not trying to get them to play a card or perform. It's really about paying very close attention to who they are and then trying to make that be a compelling photograph. And I will say, I know we have students in the room, so I'm answering this from two perspectives, but when I'm creating my work, I try to just tune into this very visceral place. I try to not overly intellectualize it and think about it too much in advance. So on some level, I'm just responding to people because of my specific identity and psychology, right? Like, you're attracted to some people and not other people. It's like hard to quantify why, right? So it's like I have an energetic connection with some people and not other people. And so I truly just follow that, like in the moment of making, and I don't overthink it. But then later, when I'm reflecting on the work and really thinking about the why behind it, then I think about all of those things. So for me, the process of making and reflecting are separate, and that preserves some freedom in the making. But I have come to realize, I'm drawn to, of course, it's a certain kind of energy, but I'm drawn to people who are fully and authentically themselves, and people who are very present in their bodies, very sure of who they are, and willingly living their full authentic self, especially people who have had to struggle to get to that place and have come out the other side with a kind of gentleness and a kind of just raw authenticity. So there's that quality I'm drawn to. I'm also really interested in and drawn to gentle masculinity and thinking about how masculinity can be more complex and nuanced than what we see in the mainstream. And I think a lot of that comes from my own journey of figuring out what my gender is and which parts of masculinity feel at home to me, which do I reject. Growing up as a visibly, gender non-conforming person, I think I was highly tuned into gender and how we read gender. So I'm really drawn to people who have a complicated, nuanced version of masculinity. And also just an ability to be really present, because my photographs require a really active participation. And so it has to be someone who wants to be part of that. And sometimes my process of making photographs dovetails with someone's personal life in a way that, part of why they're interested in doing that with me at that moment is because they have something going on in their life that it's helping them to hear out, whether it's gender related or just general life stages and evolution. But there's often a reason we're both interested. So it really is all about reading energy. And you mentioned that it really matters, my choice of subjects, and I've often spoken about my work as, all of it being an extended self-portrait, because the people that I choose to photograph says a lot about my own identity and my own desire and what I'm thinking about and interested in. So, and it's very much about how those people look at me specifically. It's like how we're looking at each other. So there is this way in which I think there's a lot of my own subjectivity in the portraits, even as I am simultaneously honoring someone else's specificity. Those two things can kind of blend.
Yeah, sure. I think that the word that you used there was active, that so much of this is active tension at different times. You, subject working together between masculinity stereotype, which is not necessarily like room for gentleness, or an idea of really affirmed and comfortable self-presentation is not always making room for gentleness. And to have these things in tension creates energy nihilism.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think too, I'm thinking about Shira, who's in one of the pictures upstairs. We had a conversation for this book, which we'll talk about how sometimes when you exist in bodies like ours, people mistake me and Shira, which I always take as a compliment, but like we have a similar gender presentation. That when you move through the world in bodies like ours, there is a way in which you're often on guard or just sort of tuned in to like, how does the space feel? Is it comfortable? Is something going to happen here? And it's like, so we've talked a lot about how that could make you sort of hardened or closed off, but there's actually something really intentional about approaching the world from a place of gentleness and like warmth and love. And I think it's that active choosing of like, yes, there has been struggle, and yes, I will also move through the world with kindness, that I'm often really drawn to, which I would say Shira, who's upstairs, like embodies that energy for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that makes for a fine transition in talking about identity as a major aspect of your work. In communicates your identity through photography. What are just your broader goals?
Yeah, so I've spent 20 plus years now thinking deeply about representation and what representation means and how important it is to see yourself and to see a life that you can imagine living. And when I was coming out, kind of late 90s, early 2000s, there were not a lot of images of people who look like me that I could find. They were in movies and TV, and I discovered the work of Catherine Opie, like in a book, in person in a book in a bookstore, and her work was the first time I had seen people who I could relate to. Of course, they didn't look exactly like me, but it was very validating. And so I was maybe, 13, 14, 15, having these experiences. And so from really early, I understood how important it is to see yourself represented. And, I think for me, I always balance two things in my work, which Dawood and I talked about a lot. There's like my own poetic, subjective, artistic voice. Like I think my work, especially in recent years, is actually primarily about these larger existential questions of being a person. It's like, what does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to love another person? What does it mean to come to know yourself through being in a relationship? How do you grapple with having limited time here? How do you grapple with loving someone immensely and knowing you can lose them? So these are the things I'm really thinking about now. But at the same time, I'm very aware of the importance of creating these complex, subjective representations of queer people and showing them in museums, back to your original museum question. I'm very intentional about that part of my practice, like wanting those representations to be in museum spaces. So yeah, I believe it's very, very important. And, thinking about the family work and like pictures of me with my daughter, I've just gotten a lot of feedback from younger queer people or younger trans people that, they hadn't imagined having a family or they didn't know it was possible. And, so it's not, I don't expect my work to resonate with everyone, and it's fine if some people don't respond to it, but I think the people who do respond to it, it can be very meaningful. And so I just have this faith that that's going to happen and it's going to help someone. And I really want my work to be meaningful and useful. I feel like I veered off of your question, but no, I think seeing yourself represented is just really important. And I think we still, even though we've come a long way, arguably to backslide a bit, but we've still come a long way. I think there's just still, there's so much room for so many different stories, right? Like we have to move past the moment where People are like, oh, we have a queer artist. Oh, we have an artist of color. It's like, that's one person. You know, it's like, there are so many different stories to be told. So I'm really interested in basically making work about life that is made through a queer lens, as opposed to making work about queer identity. And yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
You queued up for like 4 different questions. Solidly where just where you ended. The balance of queer identity with universal themes. I mean, when you were talking about how your like conversations with Shira and how you come to this place where you get to make a choice about how to interact with the world. Other people, I think, can find their way to that choice in ways other than queer identity. Through different sorts of difficulty. I hope that people in our galleries can relate to your pictures in a variety of ways because there are these themes of being with other people, of being vulnerable. And so, I don't know, how do you read through having some specific audiences or sometimes it's one individual who really needs to speak ownership of the picture, and then the rest of the audience that I prefer.
Right, yeah, I mean, I think just responding to what you said, I think most of my work centers around this idea of what does it take to live authentically and what do you have to leave behind sometimes to do that? You know, like it's really this idea of being your authentic self. And I think everyone can relate to that journey. I mean, it's not queer specific in any way, right? So it's like a universal reckoning. Yeah, so I think, you know, I think work can operate on many different levels. And, you know, for me, I'm often aware that the same show or body of work will resonate really differently depending on who's seeing it and what they're bringing to it. And that's actually something I really value about the exhibition space and in making art in general. So it's like, you don't know when it's going to reach someone who is in the place to be ready to see that. But I think, you know, obviously with a queer audience or trans audience, it can be very affirming. It can be very meaningful to see themselves in museum spaces or books or, you know, represented out in the world. And then that same work for someone who might be less familiar with the queer community, it could be very educational. And I think also, you know, I really intentionally make work in this very classical style. My work is formal. You know, it's meant to be accessible on some level. So there's also something that happens where, you know, the softness of the work or the sort of more universal approach of relationships or love sometimes pulls people in, and before they fully think about all of the content, and then that can be its own process. I mean, I'm really trying to facilitate real emotional encounters between the viewer and the person I photographed. It's like I have a real emotional encounter when I'm standing there, and then I hope that translates to the space. But I think how that plays out in someone's own life just totally depends on what they bring to it. In terms of balancing it in the making, I mean, a lot of the delicacy around queer identity honestly comes more in how I put the work into the world and like how it's written about, what context it's in, what kind of press, you know, it's like I'm often pushing back against those things like language and press and media. Like actually when I was putting the book together, there were certain texts I had written in response to a particular photograph or was telling the story, the memory of a particular photograph, and we intentionally separated those so that there was a lot of ambiguity to how people could enter that work. The films use text in the form of a letter. So again, it's this deep belief in storytelling, and I think sometimes you need words to do that. There's a limit to what you could do without words. And in combination with visual work, I think it can be really moving. And then the new book is like very full of text. So I was smiling when you were asking like, what is the role of text in the new book? So, but this is again different. It's a collaboration with a curator named Charlotte Cotton. And so the first volume is an in-depth conversation with us over 9 chapters. And there's 8 visual chapters of my work, the last 20 years of my work. So it's quite significant in text. And then there's a second volume that is conversations with people who've been important to me in my life and my work. And so that the second volume is almost all text. It includes a conversation with Dawood May and Kathy Opie, also several subjects, Oscar, Shira, El Cid, my mom as a 20-year subject, which is one of my favorite conversations. So, yeah, so I really love text and what you can do with it, and I think it manifests differently in different projects and different books.
Hi. You had discussed like the energy and the connection of who you photograph, but I was curious initially, like, how do you decide like the surroundings or the location or the interior or whatever, you know, from the beginning to relate that interior to who you're photographing?
Sure, yeah. So I think the locations I've used have changed over the course of my work. I mean, in my earlier work, I almost always, oh, now I can see it. But now you but now you can see the pictures very well. So, yeah, earlier in my work, I almost always went to people's homes because I really liked photographing in their like personal and private space. So, this is fun. So, yeah, so they were often in like bedrooms or kitchens, like in these private spaces. And then just kind of naturally over my evolution as an artist, I was more interested in moving outdoors. So I've been photographing outside more. And then the pandemic, you know, amplified that. But now I'm working very intentionally in the landscape, thinking about like what it means to render queerness in this sort of natural, expansive space. But sometimes the landscapes are specific to the person, like it's where they grew up, or it's a park they love, or I photograph in Provincetown, Massachusetts. In the summers, I teach there, so it's by the ocean, and you know, it's sometimes someone's favorite place. I'm like, where's your favorite beach? Where's your favorite? You know, so there is this back and forth in which sometimes the locations are specific to the person, and then sometimes people just don't know. They want me to suggest something. So. A lot of the outdoor work is actually made in this park near my house. It's like a 300-acre park where I spend a lot of time. The Zach and Oscar was made there. So I'm also just always kind of, as I'm out for a walk or something, just watching the light and watching the trees and kind of imagining where I could make a portrait. But yeah, again, it's kind of like a visual interest, but also, you know, where I live my life. I know my work really comes out of me being embedded in a community and in a space. So it depends on me kind of spending time here. And then also, again, just talking to the subjects about, I often ask them where they want to be photographed.
So I love how you say your work is about life, and I was wondering if you have any advice for students who may be struggling with their identity, and whether or not to overtly make that part of their hard work when they're in school.
I think every person has to answer for themselves, like how much they want to, how much of their personal life or story they want to put in their work, because it is a specific path. I will say, for me, overwhelmingly, it's been very positive. Okay. Like, overwhelmingly, the feedback I've gotten has been very positive and affirming. So I personally think there's something really valuable in just speaking and owning your truth. I think it's also just, as a person, it's just like more affirming for me. So I always encourage people to make the work they need to make, you know, and regardless of your identity, like some people are compelled to make work about their identity and some people are not. They make it work about something else, right? But if your artistic voice is telling you that you want and need to make work about your identity, I would encourage you to pursue it. And I mean, the thing about art making is you can always make the work and you don't have to show it to anyone, right? Like there's two separate processes of the making and then the sharing. And I think there's something really cathartic about making it, even if it feels vulnerable or even if you're not ready to show it, right? Like some work that I make, when I make it, it feels way too vulnerable and I have to let time pass. And then like 2 years later, I'm like, oh, whatever, you know, like it's not vulnerable in the same way. So I would just encourage you to make the work you need to make, whatever that is, and trust that like it really is this affirming experience of sharing your true self with the world.
Thank you so much for your talk. I'm curious if you think about your artwork within queer history as well as art history, and specifically thinking about like how I came to find queer elders in the 1800s through photography and not through text, and how for so long that has been made part of documentation for stories that go untold, and what your thoughts are about your portraits being both artwork and in some ways documentation.
Yeah, that's a lovely question. Thank you. No, I definitely do think about making photographs as a way of recording history. And there's multiple layers. Like one layer is like my history, right? Like of my life and my identity. And then there's also a communal layer of other people that I photograph. And so I think about that in all of my work. And I also think about how when you're not in the majority, you have to record your own history. You have to make your own images, right? Like you have to make them authentically. So I take that very seriously. But I think that's perhaps that was most the part of the motivation of the work with To Survive on the Shore, the project I mentioned. And part of why I wanted to make that was to record that history before people were gone. And it's actually kind of strange because a lot of people from the project have passed, which is not my norm in people who are younger. But I was really intentional about wanting to record the history of the people who, in many ways, like paved the way for this world we live in now. So yes, I very much think about the photographs as a kind of archive as well as being artworks.
After you shot the photo, do you work on? You manipulate it. So what is the process and how long does it take?
Sure, yeah. So I photograph digitally, and I do edit the file, but I came from a school of thought that you really do everything in camera. So I don't crop, I don't change the photo. I adjust things like light and color. And this is a kind of unsexy answer, but I'm often correcting color that the camera reads strangely to make it look like it looked in real life, because digital reads color kind of bizarre sometimes. So I'm often color correcting the skin one way and the wall another way, and it's kind of tedious, to be honest. But I basically just do global adjustments that you could do in a dark room or something like that, but no like compositing or major manipulation. I think we had the one hand behind you, so we can finish with yours.
Sorry for such a basic question, but I was very inspired by your work today, and I was wondering if you had any advice for anybody who would like to try photography for the first time.
Don't mind, yeah, I just knew this. Oh, that's a lovely question. I would say try it. Yeah, like there's lots of classes and groups, and photography is very democratic and accessible, of course, with our phones and things like that. But I would say, one thing I love about the community of photographers throughout the country is that they're very welcoming and friendly, and there's like a lot of photo-specific events. It can get real nerdy, but you can also like find your people. So I would say like jump in, like find a class, just do it. There's also some amazing gatherings like the Filter Photo Festival in Chicago. There's a group called the Society for Photographic Education that has really amazing conferences and gatherings and resources. And so I would say, tap into some of those things and look at a lot of photographs, look at a lot of art, and then start making them.